Cairo, the Sudanese military on Friday rejected calls to hand over ousted President Omar al-Bashir to the International Criminal Court, where he faces genocide charges for his deadly campaign in the western Darfur region, and said he would be put on trial at home. Lieutenant General Ahmed Awad ibn Auf. Credit. Meanwhile, General Awad ibn Auf, who was named de facto leader after al-Bashir's ouster on Thursday, announced he was stepping down as transitional leader and another general would take his place. The developments point to the sensitivity of the Darfur conflict for the military council that has taken power after removing and arresting al-Bashir amid mounting protests against his 30-year rule. Ibn Auf was head of military intelligence during the brutal campaign to suppress the Darfur insurgency in the 2000s. The United States has imposed sanctions on him since 2007, saying he armed and directed pro-government militias known as the Janjaweed, accused of widespread atrocities against civilians and rapes during the conflict. Advertisement. Ibn Auf said he would be replaced by General Abdel Fattah Burhan, General Inspector of the Armed Forces, as head of the Transitional Council. He said he was stepping aside to preserve unity of the armed forces. A young merchant carrying brooms to sell walks along a street after the recent ousting of Sudan's President Omar al-Bashir, in the capital Juba, South Sudan. Credit. Burhan's record appears to be cleaner than the rest of al-Bashir's generals, and he is not known to be implicated in war crimes or wanted by international courts. He was one of the generals who met with protesters earlier Friday to try to persuade them to end their campaign. Celebrations erupted in the streets of Khartoum after Ibn Auf announced he was stepping down, with protesters clapping and chanting, "Revolutionaries, we will continue our path." Tens of thousands had been rallying in front of the military headquarters to protest the military takeover of power after al-Bashir's ouster. At least 16 people were killed and 20 injured by stray bullets at protests and sit-ins on Thursday and Friday, a Sudanese police spokesman said in a statement on Saturday. Sudanese celebrate after officials said the military had forced longtime autocratic President Omar al-Bashir to step down after 30 years in power in Khartoum, Sudan. Credit. Government buildings and private property were also attacked, spokesman Hashim Ali added. He asked citizens to help ensure safety and public order. Earlier Friday, another top General, Omar Abedin, said that the 75-year-old al-Bashir would not be extradited to the International Criminal Court based in The Hague, Netherlands, saying doing so would be an ugly mark on Sudan. Even rebels carrying weapons, we don't extradite them, he told reporters at a news conference in Khartoum. Abedin said Sudanese courts would hold al-Bashir accountable, but did not specify what charges he could be prosecuted on. In ousting the president, the military denounced him and his government for corruption, maladministration and lack of justice. Former Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir in 2011. Credit. Apt move underscores the limits on reach of the International Criminal Court. On Friday, ICC judges rejected a request by the court's prosecutor to open an investigation into war crimes and crimes against humanity in Afghanistan and alleged crimes by U.S. forces there, in part because the U.S., Afghan government and Taliban are not expected to cooperate. In the Darfur conflict, rebels among the territory's ethnic Central African community launched an insurgency in 2003, complaining of discrimination and oppression by the Arab-dominated Khartoum government. The government responded with a scorched earth assault of aerial bombings and unleashed the Janjaweed. Up to 300,000 people were killed and 2.7 million driven from their homes. Along with al-Bashir, the ICC has indicted two other senior figures in his regime, Abdulrahim Mohammed Hussein, who was Interior and Defense Minister during much of the conflict, and Ahmed Haroun, a senior security chief at the time who last month was named by al-Bashir to run the ruling National Congress Party. Both were among those reported by the Sudanese media to have been arrested on Thursday in a sweep by the military against al-Bashir's inner circle. Abedin confirmed the media reports Friday without specifying the two men. An ICC spokesman declined to comment on al-Bashir's case. On Thursday, Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch urged the Sudanese military to hand over the ousted leader. Victims of the gravest crimes in Darfur should not have to wait any longer for justice, said Jahan Henry, Associate Director at Human Rights Watch. Meanwhile, Abedin sought to reassure protesters who, while celebrating al-Bashir's removal, opposed the military's seizure of power in his wake. After ousting the president, the military announced it would rule the country for 2 years through a transitional council. It also suspended the constitution, dissolved the government, declared a 3-month state of emergency and imposed a nighttime curfew. Protest organizers have vowed not to end their street action until a civilian transitional council is formed, saying ruled by military commanders who for years were al-Bashir loyalists is just an extension of his regime. The curfew and state of emergency have raised fears the military could eventually disperse the sit-in by force. But at least initially, it appears to be trying to persuade protest organizers to end the campaign. Speaking at a news conference aired live on state TV and flanked by other uniformed officers, Ahmed, who is tasked with leading dialogue with Sudan's political factions, insisted the army has no ambition to hold the reins of power for long. If within a month Sudan became able to run itself without chaos, we are ready to leave even after a month. The maximum is 2 years, he said. He said the military would only appoint the defense and interior ministers in any transitional government and would not interfere. This was not a coup, but a tool of change. He said, we came to guide the country forward. He said the military commanders were the sons of Siwar al-Dahab, referring to Army Chief Abdul-Rahim Siwar al-Dahab, who handed power to a civilian government after a coup in the 1980s. We will not betray you, he said. But protest organizers rejected the military's assurances, calling them deception and farce. The Sudanese Professionals Association, which has spearheaded the 4 months of demonstrations against al-Bashir, said the coup leaders are not eligible to bring change, and repeated demands for the immediate handover of power to a civilian transitional government. At the sit-in, the mood was festive. Some protesters brought in mattresses, fans and even air conditioners, while others swept the streets to keep them clean, signaling they intend to stay long-term. As thousands of Muslim worshippers lined up in the street to hold prayers, Christians among the protesters held blankets over them to shade them from the sun in a show of solidarity. There were also signs of cracks among al-Bashir's former loyalists. On Friday, the commander of Sudan's feared Rapid Support Force, a paramilitary force, expressed support for the protesters, saying the forces will not accept any solutions rejected by the Sudanese people, and called for dialogue so Sudan would avoid slipping into chaos, most viewed in worldlets block ads.